Hi everyone, so today we're going to have a little look at My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. It is quite a long poem, so when we go through the visualiser things, you will probably need to pause things, write things down from what I've said, because I won't spend a lot of time annotating absolutely everything, because it would just take too long. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the poem. So essentially it's a dramatic monologue. What that means is one person is speaking, the Duke has ultimate control, nobody else can interrupt him, shows that he essentially wants all the power for himself, and it's done through the amount of lines that Browning gives to the Duke. Nobody else actually speaks, even though it becomes very aware that there is somebody that he is talking to. That person takes on the role of an emissary, so they are sent and they liaise with the Duke about who he will next take for his next Duchess, hence the title of the poem, My Last Duchess, with the adjective last being quite significant but also quite ambiguous. We're not sure whether the Duke's referring to the last one he had or whether that would be the very last Duchess of a long line. So just be aware of that. We take on the same role as the emissary as a reader. We are invited into the conversation that the Duke has. We are kind of the go-between. We don't say anything, we look at the painting and we listen, but we essentially take on the same role. We are looking at the portraits with him. I think what's quite significant about the poem is that it's all about the painting, but it's a painting of a last Duchess, somebody who is no longer there, which begs the question why the Duke keeps it there. Yes, he keeps it behind the curtain, but he still looks at it. And I think this tells us quite a lot about the Duke's character. It's that he thinks that the painting is probably more significant than the subject of the painting, as in the fact that the painting was made by a famous portrait artist, Frau Pandolf. The idea that that carries more weight than the actual fact that the picture is of his late Duchess, really. What else? I've written a few notes down. I think the other thing that you just need to be aware is that lots of people interpret the Duke in lots of different ways. Some people really take a stand against him, some people feel quite sorry for him, but some people think he's very, very calculating. It doesn't really matter what I think, but I don't particularly like him. I think that he misunderstands the situation. He thinks that he has the control, yet actually what we will see as we come to analyse the lines of the poem is that the Duchess probably does have more control than him, because he still feels the need to look at the painting and to show her off to people. The critic B.R. German, that's J-E-R-M-A-N, not German as in a German person, he interprets the Duke's behaviour as witless, and the quotation that you would drop into an answer is witless. The idea that he's just a bit foolish, that actually might be so aggrieved by the situation because he didn't realise that the affair was taking place right in front of his face anyway. So that would be one interpretation, whereas other critics interpret him as being quite shrewd actually and quite calculated. I think essentially at the end of the day, the Duke could be viewed as an autocrat. He takes absolute control. He's an autocrat, but he presents himself as kind of like an art connoisseur, but really he tries to buy and tempts these new duchesses as he kind of buys his paintings, which would correlate with the fact that he continues to use that first person possessive pronoun, my Duchess, throughout it, the idea that the Duchess or his wife is just another possession to him that he can kind of collect, keep, and therefore manipulate and use. So let's get to looking actually at the lines of the poem. Okay, so we've already briefly talked about the form of the poem, the fact that it is a dramatic monologue, but what I didn't mention to you before is that this poem is actually written in iambic pentameter. You might want to just jot this down. It is written in iambic pentameter. Now, what that means, iambic pentameter is 5 sets of, 5 sets of beats, unstressed and beats, so they kind of sound like a heartbeat. Now, what that does is that it sounds conversational. However, because they are written in couplets, so you see here, wall, call, hand, stand, said, read, the fact that they are rhyming couplets, as well as being written in iambic pentameter, shows kind of like a dichotomy, a little bit of a tension within here, because the couplets show this desire for control, yet what you'll also notice is that there's quite a lot of enjambment. So when the line runs on to the next one, the sentence carries on. So the enjambment contrasts with the idea that there's quite a desire for control through the couplets. The enjambment suggests that maybe the Duke gets carried away, or maybe that he does actually lack that control that he believes that he first has. So you've got this that you can also mention as well. So you've got the couplets. I mean, you can write your notes in more detail than this, but the couplets indicate a sense of control, yet the enjambment shows a lack of control. Okay, so that would be something interesting to talk about when talking about the presentation of the Duke. If you wanted to talk about the fact that he thinks that he is powerful, that might be something that's really useful. We talk about structure quite a lot and the way in which the tone changes, but what you need to be aware of is that the poem builds towards a kind of confession. So tension rises as we go through and we begin to paint this portrait for ourselves of what the Duke is really like. You'll know already that this is based on real people, but they're based on the figures. Whether this is actually really how they behaved, we're not entirely sure, but it was Duke Alfonso II of Ferrara. The Duke, his wife died in suspicious circumstances. There was rumours that she was poisoned, which is a very Victorian way to be poisoned, and I think potentially Browning might have quite liked that. Browning, in some of his other poems, he talks about the way in which women would poison their husbands, so I think there's a little bit of subversion. If you are interested in that and the kind of criminology behind the Victorians, especially how Browning brought them in, it is more of an A-level concept, but this poem does feature on the A-level syllabus, then you might want to take a look at their laboratory. I'm not saying that you have to, but it might be worth looking at, especially if you have got a mind to sort of think, I might actually want to do A-level English. Then take a look at the way in which Browning was interested in the method of poisoning to kill. So he might have been a bit interested in that story, which is why he's used it. There's no mention of poisoning in this specific poem, but it is worthwhile knowing the background. Especially if you're looking for the highest grades. So let's just have a little look. We come in and we're clearly mid-conversation. That's My Last Duchess painted on the wall. Now, if you're not sat there looking at the painting, then you don't know what that refers to. Therefore, you should know what this is, but it's a dietic reference. It doesn't make sense without seeing it. There's a shared understanding that comes when you can see something and you can say, well, that one there, that pen, pass me that cup, or whatever it might be. So it's the dietic reference that comes through here. That's My Last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. And there's quite a sinister tone there, looking as if, that subjunctive there, also in play. I call that piece a wonder. Now, Frau Pandolf's hands work busily a day, and there she stands, which is pretty ironic because she doesn't stand anywhere. She is in a painting. She is captured within a painting, and I think that that's quite significant. Her image is captured in the portrait, and that's almost what the Duke wants to do throughout. He wants to control her. He wants to capture her. And that becomes very clear. He just captures her in this moment. Will it please you sit and look at her? Like, please sit and look at her. Now, we take on the role, I've already mentioned this, of the emissary as well. And we are now invited to look at this portrait of the Duchess through the words that the Duke uses. And he keeps going through. So he talks about the fact that he's worked busily. Yes, he may have worked busily on the portrait, but we're also wondering if he worked busily on his relationship with the Duchess as well, which is probably... could be one of the reasons why the Duke is pretty annoyed by the fact that she's managed to dupe him. He's of a high status. Later in the poem he talks about he chooses never to stoop, which is actually just here, you can see it. He's of a higher status than her, so he might have been even worse. The term for this is to be cuckolded, when a woman of a lower class has an affair behind her husband's back. The idea of being cuckolded might be worth bringing in. He talks on through, I'm not going to talk about this in loads of detail because I know you have studied it already, but the thing that I really want to look at here is this power dynamic. He says to us, the reader and the emissary, that we should look at the picture of the Duchess, and he says, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I. Just note the parenthesis here.
it's kind of like a side note, like no one pulls the curtain apart from me. It's just an attempt at control. He's lost control, hasn't he? He's lost control of the Duchess. And he feels that the only way he can control her is by moving the curtain back and forth. However, this is kind of an ironic attempt at control, because if he was fully in control, he wouldn't even need the portrait of the Duchess anymore. The fact that she sits behind a curtain and he still feels the need to look at her shows just what sort of an influence she exerted over him. Maybe not in life, but certainly in death. So just put that. There's an ironic use there. And we go on. We don't need to look at it all. He talks about it was not her husband's presence only that called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Now maybe he feels the need that he has to draw the curtain because he's embarrassed that the Duchess looks really happy within it, and it would be quite obvious that the Duke was not painting the picture. So maybe he's embarrassed, so he hides it away. But now he seems to try to really show us what the Duchess was like. He almost tries to justify her character and why she's no longer there. It wasn't her husband's present only. He talks here, perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much. Now a mantle is kind of like a, I suppose the Victorians would have called it a muff. It's kind of like a fur, like a scarf really, but you'd put your hands inside it to keep your hands warm. But the mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much. So obviously Frau Pandolf has asked the Duchess to expose her wrist. Now whilst nowadays we might not think that the wrist is a particularly alluring body part, in the Victorian era they would have thought that any glimmer of flesh was quite flirtatious. They were very, very reserved, very covered up. So the fact that Frau Pandolf has exposed the Duchess's wrist in the painting might show that flirtation between them, which would give a clue to the Duke that there maybe was more than just a artist and subject relationship going on here. So you might want to talk about that. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart. How shall I say? Too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. It's quite cynical of her here, isn't he? She liked whatever she looked on. As, she was so easily impressed, and he almost he looks down on her here, and her looks went everywhere. He shows us here she's got a bit of a roving eye. Now she might not have. She might just have taken a liking to Frau Pandolf, but here the Duke categorises the fact that she's got this roving eye. However, had the Duke known that she was potentially very, very flirtatious, would he have potentially not put a stop to this before the fact that he's really had clarification of this within the portrait? We're not entirely sure. She talks about all of the things that she really liked, and he talks, she really liked the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherry some officious fool broke in the orchard for her. So she ranks all of these things the same. So the daylight going down, a bough of cherries, and he says some fool broke into the orchard for her. So, she was really impressed by some cherries. The white mule, I'd just like to draw your attention to this. The white mule she rode with round the terrace. A mule's a donkey. If you think about princess or fantasy stories, the princess would usually ride a horse. The fact is that he almost says, well, she wasn't quite as great as she thought she was because she didn't have a horse, she just had a mule. So she didn't have all of the things, but the fact is that she had a white mule. Some people might not be able to tell the difference between a mule and a horse, so it's almost like she pretended to be something that she wasn't, and the Duke now really criticises her for that. So I'm just going to write pretense here, but you can obviously flesh out your annotations based on what I've just said to you. But he thinks that the offerings are pathetic compared to what he offered her, and we go on to see this. Let's just move this over here. So he says, she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her a lightly approving speech or blush at least. She thanked men, good, right, good, I'm glad that she was thankful, I'm glad that she was polite, but thanked somehow, I know not, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Now this really shows the patriarchal nature of the Duke here, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. He thinks that she should have thought that him giving her his name was the best gift she ever could. However, this shows the possessive nature of the Duke. that by giving somebody their surname essentially shows that they belong to them, or they are in partnership with them. Now, we could just say maybe the Duchess just wanted to have a bit of freedom. She didn't want to be a possession of the Duke's, but he feels that being possessed by him was the greatest gift, or the greatest honour. Oh, spelled that wrong. Look at that. Honour. Done it again there. And, you know, there's lots of discussions, you know, should women take their husband's name when they get married? And we don't need to enter into that debate. But it just shows the patriarchy. That actually having someone's name is not a physical gift, is it? It's more something to do with status. And now we're aware that the Duke is unbelievably concerned with status throughout anyway. Okay, so we come through. Where are we going to? He says, even if I made excuse, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. So, you know, I could make excuses for her. I could just say, oh, look, you've this here, that disgusts me. You exceed the mark. Like, you've gone too far. That annoys me. But he thinks that that would be forgiving her. And he feels that that would be stooping, that she should be perfect because she's with him, and I choose never to stoop. That is a nod to the social status of the Duke here. Oh, sir. And we're not sure whether actually the emissary has tried to say something here. But he carries on. We don't hear from him if he does. Oh, sir, she smiled. No doubt, whenever I passed her. But who passed without much the same smile? He seems quite annoyed that everybody has the same treatment, that she was polite to everybody. He wants to feel special, and I don't think the Duchess gives him that. This grew. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together, which is the most significant line, isn't it, of the poem, arguably. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. It's very controlling, which is what you've got to notice, obviously. I gave commands. He hasn't done it. So he can't be seen to be guilty of the crime. He's given commands because that's what he would do to assert his status. He would dispatch people to do things that he wanted them to do. Then all smiles stop together, and note the caesura here. There's a definite turning point. And maybe the Duke checks himself and thinks, oh my gosh, I've told the emissary that I've killed the Duchess, or that there's no more smiles. The understanding is that she's dead here, because she was smiling all the same. She was smiling all the time, is what we've just been told. All smiles stop together. And then he says, there she stands as if alive, which is a repeated line from the start of the poem, as if alive. Well, the problem is that she's not alive. But this is probably how he wanted her to live her life, like a statue, like a possession. Will it please you rise? No, will you please stand up? We'll meet the company, we'll go. And it becomes very formal here. And we go back into this kind of business deal, which is why the emissary is there anyway. The emissary from the Count is there anyway. The Count, your master's known munificence, is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed. And there's mention here of the financial ties with the marriage. For those of you that aren't clear on a dowry was a sum of money or a gift of monetary value that came from a bride's family. So if you took a bride of a wealthy family, you would have a higher dowry, and it's almost like the father would pay the husband to take on the daughter. But he's concerned there. So these marriages are a transaction. So just be aware of that these are not for love. Though his fair daughter self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. So he's like, I told you at the start that his daughter is my object. Like, if something's your object, like your goal, so you could look at that kind of dual meaning. But an object is a possession, isn't it? An object is also inanimate. It's not a person. An object is a thing, a possession that you can use however you want, so just be aware of that. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Right, let's go down back to the dinner party or whatever they were having. And he can't resist here. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse. Thought a rarity, which clouds of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. He just has the last bit. He turns back to his art collection. this pretense that he is just, he's showing this painting because he's very proud of the fact that Frau Pandorf has painted it for him. But actually this is all vanity. And he's very single-minded, and it's very selfish. Like, he made it for me. He hasn't made it for anybody else. But it's just the arrogance that comes through here. So notice Neptune. Neptune, god of the sea as well. So maybe, he surrounds himself with these images of godliness, because in the Duke's world, he is at the top of the food chain. He picks the objects and he is in control. So very, very brief whip through there. What you need to be aware of is that this is a poem that is very, very useful for any question on power. Now, be aware that if you get a question in the exam, or if you're just doing one in class on power, that doesn't mean that you have to talk about the fact that people have power. You can also talk about the lack of power. Now, in here, you've got the contrast, really, between the fact that the Duke believes passionately that he has power, that he's given the commands, he's stopped the smiles, he's essentially killed the Duchess off, but actually you can flip that on its head and you can talk about the power that she possesses. So this unexpected power in the patriarchal society that the Duchess holds, in that she's still in that picture, hanging on the wall, hidden behind a curtain, in the Duke's home, and she still tempts him to look at her, which shows a lack of understanding on the Duke's part of just how much power she does exert over him, even in death, which arguably would make her more powerful, as she can't actually do anything in death. She is there looking as if she were alive.